This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's the place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. So welcome aboard, folks. Here we are at Core Brain Journal one more time, and we're having today an occasion to talk to a very well-published author who has some serious opinions about the way we can actually use rational living to contribute to our personal development. And he's written a number of books about it. We're going to cover the books and we're going to discuss these matters. This is John Vespasian, and what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce him a little bit, and then we're going to get some personal notes on exactly who John is and why he is sharing these opinions with you. So he's the author of, get this folks, 7 books about rational living, including When Everything Fails, Try This. These are all available on Amazon, and we'll have the link down below. Rationality is the Way to Happiness. A number of books, the 10 Principles of Rational Living. You know, in the books, rationality is certainly encouraged, and it's one of the things we've been encouraged over at Core Psych, and we do every day in our practice with Core Brain Journal as well. So, John, having said that, those are the books that you've authored. I haven't gone through every single one of them, but if you could just tell us a little bit of personal, who you are, where do you live, what do you do for a living?
I live in Europe, and I started to write in 2008. I wrote my first book, and the reason why I started to write is because I could not find the kind of books I wanted to read. So I've been a reader of self-help books, philosophy books, science books for many, many years. At a certain point, I got dissatisfied with the kind of books that were available, because I wanted to find books of practical philosophy that go beyond generalities. Because if you get the normal, philosophy, self-help books you can find in the market, say, okay, they give you a few ideas, a few guidelines, but they never really get into specifics. And I thought, okay, I can do better than that, I thought, but I have to find a different methodology. And the way I have been writing now, it's 7 books and writing now the next one, is by trying to develop practical philosophy, rational philosophy based on historical examples. So instead of going to generalities and saying, okay, you could do this and that, what I like to do is to analyze stories of real people, remarkable people that I find really interesting to follow, and try to figure out what they did right and what they did wrong. And this is the basis for my books. So I've been going through many examples from the US, from Europe, from Asia, and trying to draw conclusions, because the main theory that goes through my books is that if you try to take decisions rationally, and if you try to think things through, in the long term, you are basically assured of getting good results.
Sounds terrific. Very interesting. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about these books. Let me get a little more of a picture for our listeners. What country are you in over there, John?
I'm living in the Netherlands at the moment. So we are talking now, it's 6 hours difference from New York.
And I didn't quite hear what you said. Where are you living?
In the Netherlands.
Oh, in the Netherlands, yes. Yeah, great. A couple of visits up there. I love that country. It's fantastic. So let's get started with, that's the theme. Are you doing anything professionally other than writing? Are you a counselor? Are you a therapist? What do you do? How did you come to these conclusions?
No, I've developed a career for many years in the, I would say, commercial sciences and commercials business. This is what I do in most of the time, so I'm writing books on the side.
So when you say that, I'm still interested in what that commercial sciences are. What do you actually do?
I'm working for a big organization and doing economics, commercial business.
Oh, interesting. So let's take a moment, because we don't have an overriding specific objective except to educate the audience. But let's take a moment to talk about some of these really intriguing personalities. When you said that you're writing about famous people and their take and their benefits and their successes and their problems, let's break some of them down. Who's your favorite of the whole bunch that you've been writing about?
One of the ideas that goes through my books is that it is better to try to be rational than to embrace positive thinking, which seems to be in the U.S. A dominant philosophy. Mm-hmm. And people are encouraged to say you have to go for it, you have to do it, you have to try to get what you want. But one of the themes that comes back in my books is that this is a relatively new philosophy, positive thinking. It has 150 years perhaps, and the world has been working without it very, very well for many years. And I like to study examples that go further in history. And one of my favorite examples is Howard Carter. He's an archaeologist that made one of the big discoveries in Egyptian archaeology in the 1920s, the tomb of Tutankhamun. And this guy spent his life, 10 years of his life, making holes in the ground, looking for a tomb of a pharaoh that everybody was telling him it did not exist. And this is an amazing story, because Carter was not a university graduate. He actually was hired just to draw copies of the Egyptian tombs. He went to Egypt and he learned Egyptian. He learned to read hieroglyphics. And at a certain point, by checking the ancient sources, he came up with the idea that there was a tomb that had not been found, because he found this pharaoh mentioned in ancient sources, and he thought, okay, I can find it. And all professors and all official Egyptologists were telling him, you're crazy, you'll never find anything. It has been pillaged since centuries. And Carter actually managed to find a sponsor to pay for the cost of the excavation, and spent 10 years of his life making holes in the ground, not thanks to positive thinking, because nobody was telling him, oh, you can make it, you can make it. Yeah. On the contrary, everybody was telling him, look, it is impossible, you will never make it. But he always went back to the sources and say, it is written there, it should be here. And in the end, he found it.
Now, John, real quickly, let me interrupt, because I want to make sure for our listeners we get his name. And was the name Carter, Carter?
Yes, Howard Carter.
Homer?
Howard Carter.
Okay. And which book that you wrote here embraces the thinking and the story of Mr. Carter?
This is my first book, Rationality, the Way to Happiness.
Got you. I'm going to make sure we get that one. Thank you very much. We'll put that up and have that linked for our audience. So tell us a little more about what happened and why you like that experience that he had so much. What's going on with him?
Well, I found the story fascinating because you can find a guy who basically has everybody and everything against him, because he sacrificed his life just to do that. And what really I found interesting is how he came with a psychological support system that allowed him to keep going for 10 years, while everybody was telling him he was crazy. And certainly he was not religious. He was not following any positive thinking, because it has not been invented yet. The only thing that sustained Carter for 10 years was his logic, saying it has to be there because I have drawn the conclusion and it's the right conclusion. And this I found really fascinating.
Well, you mentioned his logic. That's interesting, but you also implied that he had, I think you were saying, a team with him. He had some people who were providing psychological support. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was psychological support. It was one of his associates, because he didn't have any money. So the only way to make holes, excavations, at the time was to buy a license. So he had to find the sponsor to actually put the money to pay for the excavations and to pay for the license. So he spent time looking for an associate, and finally he hit on an English wealthy man who lived in England, and he convinced him to put the money for the excavations. And actually, they worked together for many years. And at the end, this wealthy man almost ran out of money, and he told Carter, "Look, this is the very last month. You have to stop because I cannot fund you anymore." And he found actually the tomb of Tutankhamun the very last week.
Oh my gosh! Well, was there some money in that exploration ultimately for the sponsor, or what happened in that regard?
Yes, at that time you could split 50-50 with the government, and they got 50% of the collection, and you can find a big part of the collection in the British Museum in London.
Fantastic, very, very interesting. Yeah. So, in addition to telling people about using logic effectively, it sounds like you're an explorer at heart.
Well, an explorer of ideas above all.
Yeah.
But let me tell you another story that is in this book that I always found very surprising, because I also very fond of ancient history, Roman history, Greek history, and we can find in that area very good examples of rational thinking. Because at that time, even if the technology was relatively low, people have to face the same questions we face today. And one of the most fascinating stories I find in the ancient Romans is the story of Livy, who was known as a writer later in life, but he spent the first 35 years of his life completely wasted. I mean, he inherited money. He was drunk most of the time. He was overweight, he was depressed, he was traveling here and there, but he never really found his mission. And at a certain point, someone told him, "Look, if you want to be happy, you have to find a purpose in life. You have to find your mission." And Livy, he thought about it, and in the end, he came up with the idea. Nobody really knows how he came up with the idea. He came up with the idea of writing a history of Rome since the beginning. He spent the next 30 years of his life writing the history of Rome from the very early years. And he really built a monument, a historical monument, because most of what we know from that part of history was written by Livy. And in the end, he became extremely happy. And people who actually reported, who actually met him, said he was one of the happiest men they ever met.
That's interesting. Now, which one of the books? Is that in the same book on the Rationality is the Way to Happiness?
Yeah, this is in my first book. Yeah,
that's in your first book as well. So good. So you have both of those stories sound really quite interesting. So how did you did you discover these stories through just your own reading experience, or were you in some kind of a learning, teaching experience yourself? This is something I how can I explain it? I mean, I read a lot and I take notes continuously. So when I find a story, when I find something that I thought this is interesting, I usually take notes and I keep it for future books. So I have notes now for the next 20 books. So every time I want to write something, I just put the notes together and there it goes. So this story, possibly I read it, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. And it was in my mind that at a certain point I thought, I really have to write this up. And this is how I put the books together. Well, that is very interesting. You know what I would find very helpful, and I know it would help our listeners out there become your readers. And I looked at your author page on Amazon. I was trying to understand a little bit more about you prior to our conversing about these matters. And I had a hard time understanding exactly what these books were about. They talked in more general terms, but I think the specifics are most interesting. Could you give us a little bit about each one of these books that I could put it in the show notes for people?
Well, I can speak about each book for a few minutes.
All right, let's take a moment to do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, the second book is called The Philosophy of Builders.
Yeah.
And there I compiled a series of stories based on the theme of how people actually build a good and successful life, and what you shouldn't do to avoid really catastrophes.
And the book opens with the story of Leonardo da Vinci, which for many people is really the genius of the geniuses in history. And I really focus on the story from a different point of view, showing that Leonardo barely finished anything he started in life, because he made drawings for books that were not published. He designed churches that were never built. He actually prepared some models for sculptures that were never finished. And when he died, because he emigrated to France at a certain point, when he died, he was really quite poor. I mean, one of the greatest geniuses in history. The problem with Leonardo is he never focused on anything. I mean, he did a bit of painting, a bit of sculpture, a bit of science. And in the end, when you compare Leonardo with some of his contemporaries, like, for instance, Raphael in Rome, who died, I mean, he was 42, and he created a huge amount of paintings and became very famous and very wealthy. And one of the principles that goes into this book is that if you really want to develop a career and to have a stability and I would say success and happiness, you have to avoid changing your strategy continuously, because this is really what killed Leonardo as a professional, because he completely lacked focus in his life. He changed countries, he changed careers, he changed focus all the time, and when you study his work, you find it very interesting. But the guy really had a lot of problems.
Interesting. Are you saying that he suffered from attention deficit disorder?
In a way, yes.
From a superficial point of view, it sounds like he did have an executive function problem, in spite of the fact that he was immensely creative. And so that's a very, very good point. And so that was your number 2 book. And now Raphael was a painter, but of course a painter, his product is going to be a completed painting.
Indeed. One of the stories that goes into this book as well, the story of Vivaldi, who, I mean, everybody knows Vivaldi's music. And he developed a career which also has very important teachings, because Vivaldi was living in Venice for many years. He had a job basically as a music director in one of the churches. And he branched out into commercial music little by little, because they started to open some theaters in Venice. He composed music for entertainment, and he became quite wealthy in a few years. And at a certain point, some of his friends started to tell him, look, you have to try to think bigger, you have to go for it, you have to try to be the best of the best. And I don't know what got in his mind, but in the end they made him quit his job. And Vivaldi started to try to find bookings for concerts all around Europe. So the guy spent the last years of his life trying to make big money, trying to get bookings in Naples, in the north of Italy, in Austria, and he went completely bankrupt. I mean, he had a very nice life, but he completely overestimated the market, because at that moment in history, the market for commercial music was very, very small. And even if Vivaldi was a genius, he completely read the market in the wrong way, and he actually died on his way to Vienna trying to find a job.
Oh, amazing. So it's an interesting story. These remarks about your books are very, very stimulating and driving some curiosity here. I'm looking forward to chasing down these books. So let's keep right on moving. We have a few minutes left here, so let's go with your next your second book.
Next book is called The 10 Principles of Rational Living.
Oh yes, that's your third book. Sorry about that. Yes.
And in this book, I try to systematize some of the recurring principles of rational success theory. And I touch different stories of people who actually did very well and did very badly. And I opened the book with the story of Semmelweis, that you must know as a doctor.
Oh yeah.
This guy who really was right. He actually identified the problem of infection in hospitals in Vienna. But he completely exploited the knowledge the wrong way, because even if he was right, and he made an important scientific discovery, he was really getting angry with everybody else because nobody paid attention to him. Because doctors thought, no, this cannot be. I mean, we don't want to wash our hands. This is completely ridiculous. And Semmelweis, even if he was right, and managed to decrease the mortality rate in some hospitals, in the end he went crazy and he finished his life as a psychiatric patient. In the end he committed suicide because he did not really understand that the best way to prove that you're right is really to exploit it commercially and not try to convince everybody else, because by definition most people are not going to be interested.
Isn't that the truth? I mean, I'm going to just paraphrase what you said. You said something that I think is so true, that's really right in line with what we're doing here at Core Brain Journal. And that is, sometimes if you speak just to the professionals, who are themselves very opinionated about the way things should be, you sometimes miss the mark and miss the complexity of the situation. And that by actually taking it to the public and really having the public understand it and really sign off on it in an emotional, intelligent way, that would make the change. And he was really talking to the wrong market, is what you're saying. Is that right?
Yeah, he talking to the wrong market, and he really overestimated the power of reason. Because one of the ideas that comes in this book is that, rationality is good, but you also have to figure out that most people are not willing to be rational if it's not convenient. So a part of being rational is to understand that many people won't be.
This is so amazing. I mean, I just love talking to you because this is where we are. This is, I mean, quite fortuitously. Now, you may or may not know this, but this is exactly where we are with Core Brain Journal. I mean, one of the reasons we're taking it to the public, and there's no commercial to this, we're giving it away. So you might have some critical remarks about that. But the point being that if we explain some of these changes that are going on in neuroscience and brain science, if we use rationality, it's going to be helpful. But what you're saying is rationality itself is not going to get the job done to really improve mind care globally. There has to be some other kind of process that would be more effective. Is that true?
Yes, to a certain extent. But the question is that eventually reason always wins. The question is that in the short term, it implies some cost, it implies some learning, and this is not easy to see. And one of the ideas that is recurrent in my books is that unless you try to think for your decisions in terms of a lifetime, just say you're going to live 80, 90 years, maybe 100 years, most of your decisions are going to be wrong, because there is a tendency to think short term because it is convenient, because it is pleasurable, because it is easy, and we lose sight of the whole picture. And this is a mistake that I make very often, and everybody makes, because it's very difficult to think in terms of a lifetime. But if you want to be rational, this is the way you should take for your important decisions.
To say, think about the larger picture and not the moment. One of my favorites in this regard is Alfred Korsybski. He would be a guy that you would love to read. He's written a book called Science and Sanity, and he talks about how our scientific thought is lost in rationality, and that we are really not dealing with the changes with time, with context, and we're locked into labels in the way we think instead of really looking at the overall process effectively. And I've got his book is listed all over the website, but thinking along the same lines. You would enjoy that book because you're a reader, Science and Sanity by Alfred Korsybski. So,
okay.
Moving along. So because we have a limited amount of time, this is a very interesting conversation. I appreciate you taking the time with us. So then the next one would be, it looks like consistency is the next one that you're talking about.
Consistency is a book about stress. Basically, the philosophical approach to reducing stress. And the idea that it goes into this book, the central idea is that in most cases, people become extremely stressed and extremely anxious because they have major inconsistencies in their life. Because they're trying to pursue opposite or conflicting goals. They are trying to take too many contradictory things in their lives, and this in the end drives people crazy. And it's very difficult to become consistent and say, okay, I'm going to go in this direction, and everything which is not consistent, I'm going to stop, I'm going to quit. This is extremely difficult. And in the book, I go through many different examples, trying to show specific techniques for reducing stress based on the principle of consistency, which is very, very difficult to implement.
Who was the person that you brought up as the example in that particular book? Do you recall?
One of my favorite examples in this area is a Dutch philosopher from the 17th century, Spinoza, who spent most of his life earning a living grinding lenses because he could not make a living as a philosopher, and he developed the theory that the universe is always consistent, that what you see is what you actually happens because there are reasons for that. And Spinoza developed this theory, and in the end many modern therapy techniques are based on that, because they teach people that to a certain extent you should not become angry for things that in the end they are inevitable, because there are causes, there are effects, and you only become rational when you accept that some things just happen.
You're talking about the natural change in life. Instead of trying to change everything, you actually allow yourself to synchronize with a change in reality and do what you can to remain consistent in spite of it. Is that a correct way?
That's a correct point. And the whole idea of consistency is that you have to become consistent in several areas. You have to become consistent with your own philosophy. You have to become consistent with your environment, and you have to become also consistent with the market. And in the book, I go through several examples of people who they were consistent in some areas of their lives, but completely inconsistent of others. And one of the most horrible stories that I ever read, and it's in the book, is about a guy who was he was a teacher in the 19th century, at the time that Napoleon invaded Spain, and the guy was taken prisoner. He was taken to France, and he was in France. He became extremely well-read because he was in jail. Basically, he spent years reading Voltaire, reading Rousseau, and he came back to Spain with all the ideas of the French Revolution. So he was like 30 years ahead of his time. So he became a teacher in Spain, and he started to talk about what he had learned in France, about freedom, about human rights. And he immediately got warnings from the church. You should stop talking about this. These ideas are not allowed. And in the end, they burned him at the stake, the Inquisition. He was the last victim of the Inquisition in the 19th century, because the guy could not really understand why nobody was taking him seriously, because he was coming back from the future to a very backward country. And he was very rational in his ideas, but he was very inconsistent in his perception of the environment.
You know, one thing, John, I have to tell you, while I'm listening to you, of course, I have to tell you, I haven't read your books, but I really appreciate speaking with you. And there seems to be a flow to each one of them. I mean, it's like one builds on the other and builds on the other. But it's almost like you have a sequence, a course in how things should take place. And you come from one perspective, then you go into another perspective, and then you go into yet another. And you're using some really excellent examples to take us to that next level of appreciation. So very interesting. Let me push on because of our time, and let's hit just one more book before we close up. You tell me, you've got On Becoming Unbreakable. That looks like a really good one. That's your most recent one in 2015, right?
Yeah, this was published before Christmas last year. This book tries to extract the principles of self-confidence and initiative and ambition from the point of view of rationality. So how can you actually motivate yourself and work to develop a career, not on the basis of magical positive thinking, but on the basis of reason? And I go through different examples. and I show how people who have really been underprivileged in their youth, who had no studies, who had no money, who had no support, actually develop very good careers by building their self-confidence actually on facts, on reason, on logic, instead of going completely crazy trying to become, I don't know, a Hollywood actor or I don't know what, where they really have very, very few chances of success. But there are people who actually went and look at the market and say, what can I do? And my favorite example in this book, and it's a story I developed in one of the chapters, is a British painter called William Turner, who actually invented many modern painting techniques. But what is really amazing about Turner is that at the beginning, when he was a child, he did not find any way to make a living as a painter because the market was very, 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 very small. So in the end, he ended up making drawings for architectural firms, and he made drawings of churches, he made drawings of buildings, and little by little, he started to branch out in different artistic markets. And through his career, you can find Turner. He was opposed by the critics. He was really savagely criticized by the press, but he built on a career by becoming extremely efficient at what he did. And Turner was, in a way, I would say the master of efficiency in artists, because he would go because he had really no creativity. I mean, it's really a mystery of history how Turner would produce hundreds and hundreds of paintings. He had zero creativity, and he always said, I cannot really figure out how to do it. So he went on tours around Britain and Europe, taking paper with him, and he would go and he would make drawings of everything. He would make sketches of sceneries, of churches or cathedrals. He spent the whole summer making sketches, and then he went back to England. He spent his time in his room during the winter and produced 3 paintings per day. And this is something that has never been equaled. So in the end, Turner became a millionaire, even if he was criticized by the press, because he found a way to use his talent in a way that he could sell his paintings and produce many, many paintings very quickly. And nobody has done this basically since the 19th century, but Turner found a way to do it at a time where you actually have to travel by horse.
Sounds very interesting. What the punchline on that one is that Turner found himself in the process and then stuck with the process, back on your previous book that you were recommending regarding consistency.
Yes, and I would like to underline that Turner became extremely self-confident because he found a way, a realistic way to build his career. When everybody was telling Turner, okay, you will never make it, your style is too innovative, you are too advanced for your time, he just found a way to do it. And this is what is really so fascinating. So in the end, Turner became unbreakable psychologically because he found a way based on reality.
Well, now listen, John, we got to wind up here, and I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been a very interesting conversation. I know a number of our listeners are going to enjoy this wherever they are, in the gym, driving to work. But one thing, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, John, because you've really encouraged me to ask this next question, and I know others are probably thinking the same way. I'm putting you on the spot because I'd like you to select either one, but if you got to go 2, who of all of these people that you've been studying and writing about would you recommend to our audience is a kind of pinnacle, peak, top person that you think everybody should become familiar with that may not be appreciated by the public?
I think I would recommend Ovid. He's an ancient Roman author who wrote The Art of Love. It is the best book in history about dating. And the book is really fantastic because it's not really about dating. It's about personal development. And it's a book which is today, it's really an ancient book, so you have to see in the context. But if you read a book by Ovid, The Art of Love, which is now more than 2,000 years old, you will find every single modern principle of personal development.
Well, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to it because of course, I've heard the name as you go along through an education. You can't miss the name. But and over here, I'm going to just say it so our listeners get it, but Ovid would be, it's O-V-I-D is how our listeners might hear it over here on our side of the water. So listen, John, I want to take a moment to just say thank you very much. And if you have any closing remarks, we'd be happy to hear them. Do you have anything else that you want to punctuate your presentation for our audience?
Well, my work is easy to find. If you type my name on Google, you will find my site, you will find my blog, you will find my books. So it's very easy to find. You just type John Vespasian and you will find it.
John, we're going to have all those links right there at Core Brain Journal under your interview here. So everybody will be able to pop right on it. And we're going to have the books very easily available there as well. And your blog, all the links are going to be there. Thank you so much, John, for taking the time. We really appreciate you spending the evening with us. And look forward to talking to you again in the future sometime.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.